Hello and welcome. Welcome to Thursday's edition of the Workplace Wellbeing Summit. It's so great to have you here today, wherever you are tuning in from. Thank you for joining us. If you have missed any of the sessions earlier on this week, then don't worry, they have all been recorded and they will all go out to you on an email, probably at the start of next week, along with all the details of the speakers and all the recordings. If you're not registered and you've somehow managed to start watching this, then you can register. The details are on the screen now. And then you will receive everything at the end. Don't forget to come back tomorrow as well, because tomorrow is the last session at 1 p.m. and we will be having a session focused on mindfulness with Corinne Griffith from Calmify. And it is going to include a bonus mindfulness DJ set, which is going to be really good fun and something a little bit different. And it's also suitable for your entire team. So you can invite everybody to the Friday session. So today I'm going to introduce you very shortly to Amy Johnston from Urban Wellness. And I'm just going to grab my notes on Amy now. Here we go. So when I bring Amy in, let's bring her in now. We have got Amy here from Chicago. So yeah, Amy's based in Chicago, which is really great to have somebody, from across the pond with us for a different perspective. And Amy will tell you a little bit more about herself, but she's the Director of Education at Urban Wellness. What I found really interesting, there's a new Gallup report out on workplace insights, and it actually found that the US and Canada were the most engaged regions across the world right now in terms of kind of workplace wellbeing. So that's interesting. And the focus today is going to be on stress. So Amy's presentation is called Stressors, Stress and Strategies for Coping. And it's going to be geared towards HR and leaders, which I'm sure that's going to be you if you're watching right now. So one thing that I loved when I was doing a little bit of research, and Amy, I'm sure you're going to share more about this, but one thing that I noticed in your kind of brief that you sent me was that you said that the audience will build a toolkit of strategies to rebuild relationships, listen to learn, and cultivate a culture of trust and authenticity so that people can feel brave enough and safe enough to be themselves and do their best work. And that just really, really resonated with me. I'm not sure if you're going to dive into that more specifically today.
Definitely.
Brilliant. But yeah, so if you're watching, sit back. Amy is going to take the stage for the next 45 minutes or so. And I'm really, really looking forward to this. Thanks for joining us, Amy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be here with you all today from Chicago. I lived in Dublin for 5 years a while back, so I was almost in the UK, but not quite. It's great to be with you today. We are going to cover a lot in 45 minutes, so I'm going to go quickly, but you'll be able to watch this recording back later and have the slides and connect with me afterwards if you have questions. So I am going to go quickly, but it's because we have a lot to cover. But I'm really, really excited to be here today.
Thank you. Right. Well, what I'm going to do is I am going to duck out and I'm going to let you take the stage, Amy. And I'm really looking forward to this. So I'm sure there's going to be some questions towards the end.
Perfect. Okay. We'll see everybody at the end. Well, let's get started. We are going to cover a lot today. We're going to have a quick welcome and check in with ourselves. And then we're going to talk about some pieces of the puzzle that impact workplace mental health. And that's going to be stigma, burnout, stress, trust and connection, and coping and resilience. And then we're going to wrap up just by thinking about, how do we as leaders define mental health at work, and then have some time for some questions. So let's just jump in. I want you to first just take a few minutes to reflect on how you're feeling right now. Over the past few months, even the past few weeks, I think we've all been coping with the stressors of the last few years differently, and we all kind of feel it in different ways. So, have you been down in the dumps? Have you just been feeling really low? Have you been feeling like you're kind of juggling and keeping everything in the air, but managing? Have you been really worried and anxious? Some folks actually feel pretty confident that they're on top of things right now. Frazzled is kind of the one that the most people have been putting their hands up for lately. It's just feeling like there's so much going on and we're pulled in so many directions. And then some people really are just like, I'm checked out, wake me up when it's over, I'm done. And a lot of people are feeling more than one of these things at the same time. So just take a moment and see, where are you at today? Where have you been over the last few weeks? And then a quick reflection on your experience of talking about mental health at work. So either yours or someone else's. Is there a time that you can think of when you felt kind of uncomfortable talking about mental health at work? What was that like? How did you feel? Was it someone else's situation? Was it yours? Or are you always very comfortable with it? And is it something that you really feel good about? So again, just framing the conversation with that feeling. And when you feel uncomfortable talking about mental health at work, a lot of times it's because of stigma. And, identity and mental health are really connected when it comes to stigma. So some statistics are that 1 out of 5 people have a mental health diagnosis at any given time. But a more important statistic is that 5 out of 5 people have mental health. All the time, every day, we always have it. Mental health is part of everyone's lives, just like our physical health. We all have mental health. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that spectrum. But when it comes to stigma, your identity really plays a part in your privilege, in being able to have a mental health issue openly, to be able to talk about it and share about it, your access to mental health treatment and care. So depending on whether you live in a community where there's mental health treatment, whether you have mental health practitioners who look like you or have shared experiences you do, whether you have in the States, especially, the health insurance or the healthcare coverage to be able to seek out mental health care. And in other countries, whether there are long waiting lists or whether you have to go, really far out of your community to access care. And then finally, safety. What we look like, where we come from, impacts our safety in even being able to have a mental health challenge, whether that's at work or in our communities. So thinking about identity is really important. So we all have identities and we all have lots of different parts of ourselves that make up our identities. So this is just a list of things that came up in my mind when I started thinking about my identity. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a Chicagoan, I'm a white, cisgendered, documented, able-bodied woman with a graduate degree, right? There are lots of pieces of my identity that give me privilege and some that marginalize me. So thinking about your own identity is a good way to start framing this conversation around mental health at work, and as well thinking about the identity of your colleagues, the people that you support, your clients, the other people that you interact with. So when we're thinking about identity, I like to use this wheel of power and privilege, and some of us have parts of our identities that are much closer to that center of power. Some have parts of our identities that are much more marginalized, and most of us have kind of a constellation of those, right? Some of our identity is closer to power, some of it's more marginalized, and this is, again, a way to start framing this conversation about mental health at work. So we all have it all the time, and I like to think of it as lanes in a swimming pool. So if you look at this graphic and you imagine that this is a swimming pool with the painted lanes on the bottom, and you can be swimming in your lane and, maybe something happens where you start drifting into a different lane at some point, or you might start struggling in your lane. And so thinking about that, we can all be in different sections of this swimming pool at any given time. You might be thriving in some parts of your life, you might be struggling in others. And from a workplace mental health point of view, we really think about that thriving lane as prevention, putting those wellness activities and education into place. When folks are surviving, we really want to think more about early intervention. How are we checking in with our teams? How are we supporting them? Struggling is when we think more about that individual support, therapy or employee assistance programs. And then when folks are in crisis, that's just when we really need to make sure we're connecting them with more intensive support. But I would bet that most of us have been in most of these lanes over the last few years. And that it's not a matter of having a mental health issue or not. It's how's our mental health doing along a spectrum at any given time. And I just like to remind us that a lot of times the people who look like they're doing fantastically well are actually struggling, right? And sometimes we do that, right? We're very good, especially as leaders and people who support others, at saying, I'm fine, I am great, I'm fantastic, I'm fine. We rarely are. right? There's always something that we're dealing with. So just paying attention to being more vulnerable and transparent about your own mental health, and recognizing that other people might also need that little bit of extra support or permission to be vulnerable. So thinking more about stigma, 8 out of 10 workers with a mental health condition say that shame and stigma are actually preventing them from seeking care. And this is from the National Alliance on Mental Illness here in the States. But I imagine that the numbers are probably pretty similar across countries. And words matter, right? So being thoughtful about how you speak about mental health is really important. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Thinking about mental and physical health parity. So what are the benefits like in your organization as far as being able to take time off for mental health as opposed to take time off for, a hip replacement or an open heart surgery, right? Being transparent and vulnerable as leaders. So being able to start being more honest about our own experiences, struggles, and growth so that it's safe for other people to do that. And then investing in employee well-being by offering, training and education and workshops and support. And then really preparing leaders for this task. And these are all really good ways to start addressing that stigma issue. And when we say language is important, it's really simple. You can flip the script between saying a person who uses drugs instead of a drug addict, or a person with bipolar disorder instead of saying she's bipolar, a person without housing instead of a homeless person, or a person who died by suicide instead of a person who committed suicide. These small shifts might not feel incredibly important as you're saying them, but to the person who's hearing them, who may have been impacted by drug addiction or a mental health diagnosis, or not having housing, or having a family member or a friend who died by suicide, those language shifts are really important in being respectful and supportive, and taking away some of that sting of the stigma. So we're going to move on to burnout. Burnout is something that's been just a rampant topic over the last few years, and for good reason, because we've been going through a lot. So burnout and compassion fatigue are related, but slightly different concepts, but we're going to sort of bunch them together for our purposes here today. The World Health Organization really states that burnout is a workplace-related phenomenon. Burnout is not something that happens to you at home or in your community. It's related to energy depletion and exhaustion at work. And it really has this increased mental distance, negativity, this feeling like you're not engaged or really caring that much about your work anymore, and feeling like your ability to do your work has been depleted. Different from that a little bit is compassion fatigue, because this is where we care so much that we start to lose our sense of empathy, right? It's caring to the point that it wears us down. But the symptoms and even the impacts of both of these can be really similar. So it's just important to think about, if you're in a caregiving position or a position of supporting others, where a lot of HR folks and leaders are, that it might not be burnout as much as compassion fatigue, running out of steam from caring so much. And it can really lead to a lot of consequences that we're going to cover. So some of the factors that influence our vulnerability to burnout and compassion fatigue are our individual factors. So that kind of comes back to identity, our personalities, our genetics, the families that we grew up in, the values that we have, those pieces of who we are influence our ability to cope with stressors and buffer against burnout. We have our life situation factors. So these are going to be things like, how are we doing right now? Are we able to make our rent every month okay? Are we struggling to buy our groceries? Do we have childcare issues or elder care issues that we're trying to manage? Are we in conflict with our partner? So what's going on in our lives currently? And that's also going to influence our ability to cope. And then finally, organizational factors. So do we have manageable workloads? Do we have supportive colleagues? Do we have good relationships with our supervisors? Are we working in a setting that's high stress or something that feels a little bit more manageable, right? So the integration of these 3 different circles is really where we're going to find our own vulnerability to burnout, compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, and all these stressors. And it's going to be different for everyone. So a circumstance that's happening at work is going to influence me differently than my colleague next door, right? Because our individual factors and our life situation factors are different. So just being mindful of that when you're trying to support others, that your experience might not be the same as theirs. We all know about the costs of burnout, but I think it's important that we continue to list them and vocalize them. People not being able to show up for work, dissatisfaction at work, changing jobs frequently, turnover, poor mental health in terms of, increased anxiety, panic, depression, mood disorders, physical illness. And we're going to talk about how stress impacts the body today as well. And then billions of dollars in costs to kind of deal with all these things. So it's worth paying attention to. These are some indicators of compassion fatigue and burnout that a lot of us don't necessarily realize are indicators, right? We might not be connecting the dots that these could be related to workplace stressors. So I'm not going to read all of these out to you because you can have a look yourselves, but I'm going to highlight a few that I notice in myself. And I'd love for you to think too about which ones of these resonate with you and maybe spark something that you're like, yep, that is actually something that I've been experiencing, didn't connect the dots before. So for me, I think minimizing the concerns of others comes up. So I'm a therapist in Chicago. So part of my work is doing workplace support around mental health and well-being. And then part of my job is seeing clients one-on-one for therapy sessions. And I noticed that when I'm feeling more burned out or more pressured, I might not be able to really hold enough space for the stressors of other people. It might feel like, their issue isn't serious enough to warrant a lot of concern. Or at home, right? When I'm focused so much on the needs of my clients in the therapy room or in the workplace, and my sister might come to me with a problem, and I just really can't hear it because it doesn't feel big enough in comparison to everything else that we're dealing with when we're stressed. Inability to listen or avoidance. I'm sure that you've experienced this where maybe you're a little bit maybe delighted when someone cancels a meeting or doesn't show up for something that you were not really looking forward to, seeing a colleague down the hall and taking a turn the other way. So ways to kind of avoid connecting. A lot of times you'll find yourself having maybe a dissociative moment where you lose track of where you are in the meeting. You're not there in the room for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden you're back and you've missed a couple of minutes of what was going on. And then I think, guilt, fear, anger, all of these emotions that have been coming up for us over the last few years that we're not really used to experiencing, especially in the workplace. And then as a mom, I think grandiosity comes into play a lot. So this sense of, if I don't do it, no one else will do it right. No one else will do it the way I do. I have to do it all myself, which really isn't true. And I think it's a symptom of when we're feeling burned out and overwhelmed. So have a look through, see which ones of these kind of resonate with you. And you can use this list to start conversations with your own teams around where people might be struggling. So we're going to talk about stressors, which are different from stress. And stressors are the things that activate that stress response in your body. So a lot of times they're external. So work issues, family issues, experiences of discrimination, norms and expectations. These are all things that come at us, right? But we can also have internal stressors. And these are things like self-criticism or struggles with our body image or identities, concerns and worries about the future, right? So these are all things that activate a stress response in our bodies. And at work, some major stressors are really not having enough control over your workload and your role, being concerned about job security, whether or not you're going to have a job for the long term, those office politics and relationship issues that often get in the way, and then a lack of balance, which is not just work-life balance as far as hours, but also even within your workload, a balance between the work that nourishes you and resources you and the work that feels heavy or tedious, right? Not having enough meaning in your work. And then obviously COVID-19 has been a massive stressor and continues to be something that we have to manage in the workplace. These are pretty well known at this stage, but I think it's important, again, to sort of say them out loud, that although COVID is something that's sort of moving to the back burner in a lot of places, it's still very much a part of workplace stress, and especially for folks in HR and leadership roles, as we try to figure out how do we incorporate this new hybrid environment into a lot of our organizations. So people are still, in some places concerned about exposure. Folks are really still trying to figure out how to balance personal and family needs while we work. Managing different workloads, using technology in a way we've never had before. As a therapist, we've been doing Zoom sessions for 2 years, which is something that I'd never expected to do. and just figuring out, how that impacts relationships and the ability to build rapport. There's still a lot of uncertainty about employment and our future, and, figuring out what our workplace and work schedules are now that people are commuting some days, working from home some days. Some folks are completely remote, other folks are in the office, right? So there's a lot of negotiation to be happening. And return to the office is, challenging and beneficial. And this is something that as leaders, we have to help our teams manage. And there's a lot of stress related to this, right? So I like to really highlight that we need to be able to hold both at the same time. Things can be challenging and beneficial at the same time. And for different folks, a mix of the two. So, we have challenges that are related to getting back into the office, and we have benefits like rebuilding those relationships, feeling connected again, that energizing and collaboration, and being able to support each other in person. So just thinking through for you, what are some of the challenges, but also what are we gaining by starting to reconnect again in person? So we're going to move on to stress, right? We're talking about stressors, but now we're going to focus on stress itself. And stress is something that happens within our bodies. So there are two types of stress. We've got good stress and bad stress. And yes, there is good stress. And good stress is the kind of thing that happens when you're driving down the road and a dog runs out in front of your car and you slam on the brakes without even thinking about it. Maybe if there's someone next to you, you put your arm out in front of your passenger to try to keep them safe. It all happens without thinking. And when that happens, your cortisol and your adrenaline shoot up. You respond to the situation at hand, and then the dog keeps running across the street. You take a deep breath. Your cortisol and your adrenaline start to return to baseline. You might call your partner and say, oh my gosh, I just nearly hit this animal, but everything's okay. And you keep going. You get to work safely. That's actually a good stress response. That stress response was created to keep you safe in a dangerous situation. And it's really important that we have that. Bad stress, on the other hand, is when we have chronic, repeated exposures to these situations that are constantly triggering our stress hormones, and we never get them back down to baseline again, right? We don't get that resolution. And that happens a lot of times at work when you're dealing with difficult clients or a challenging relationship with colleagues, or a lack of feeling that you have meaning and support at work, right? When you're going in every day and your stress hormones are constantly climbing and there's never that whew moment where things resolve. And over time, that bad stress has a lot of impact on our bodies. It increases our heart rates and our respiratory rates. It can cause sort of immune compromise. It's really hard on our organs, specifically to have those cortisol and adrenaline hormones coursing all the time. It also gives us a very short-term focus, right? We can only pay attention to the task at hand if we feel like we're at risk or we're under pressure or we're in danger. And when our hormones are surging like that and the part of our brain is turned on that gives that stress response, we're not able to see the big picture. We're not able to kind of think more long-term. And so it does impact our ability to do our job because the stressors are keeping us focused just on that task at hand, as opposed to being able to be more creative and look at, the longer term, the bigger picture. Our stress hormones and our stress system were really created to keep us safe, right? To escape from a lion if we needed to run. That fight, flight, and freeze mode doesn't work so well in an office setting where we can't really just drop our notebook and run away. We can't really get into a fight in the moment to try to handle the situation, and freezing is not going to move us forward in our goals. So it's really trying to figure out, how do we complete that stress cycle, get those hormones back under control, and being able to get back to the place of feeling safe to look at our bigger picture. And, thinking back to identity, the impacts of all of this aren't equal. So depending on your identity and your structure in that wheel of power and privilege, different pieces of these might feel relevant to you. But I just sort of like to think of it in terms of, what have we lost and what are we feeling? And how is this all impacting our stress response? So lots of us have lost routine, or a sense of accomplishment, or being able to get out and exercise in the same way. Some feelings that have been coming up that we're not used to. We might have a lot of uncertainty, or feeling overwhelmed, or hypervigilance, feeling like nothing is safe. So thinking for yourselves, taking a moment to reflect, or if you're watching the recording, go ahead and pause and take a moment. What are we, noticing that we've lost, and what are the feelings that have been coming up for us? And these are just some indicators of chronic stress. And there's really emotional, physical, personal, and workplace. And what I like to point out is that if you're starting to feel workplace impacts, you're probably already feeling a lot of the other three, because we're really good at keeping it together at work until we can't anymore. So just paying attention to which of these indicators might be coming up for you, and have you been addressing them, paying attention to them, and trying to notice where they're coming from. So those are sort of the stressors, the hard parts. And now we're going to move into some strategies for coping with all of this. So we're going to think about some external resources, things we can do in the workplace, and then some internal resources that we can sort of cultivate within ourselves. So I know that was a lot of talking quickly, but I really wanted to get through all of that so that we'd have time to think about strategies. So when we're thinking about our external resources, we're going to talk about building psychological safety at work, starting to recreate that trust and connection, because we've been really isolated, working in silos, and not really having that ability to connect in the same way. And then thinking about how do we focus on that anti-stigma workplace. When we think about our internal resources, we're going to briefly touch on some cognitive behavioral strategies. I'm going to introduce you to some concepts around positive psychology, resilience, and self-compassion, and hopefully we'll have time to do a brief mindfulness exercise. I know tomorrow you're going to be getting a whole session on mindfulness. But I think it's really important, especially when thinking about burnout and stress, that we think about it in terms of internal supports, but also external and system and structural interventions. Because burnout is not something that's wrong with us as individual employees. It's something that is off base and out of balance within our systems and our structures. So as leaders, it's really important to think about the systems, not just the individuals. So trust and connection. We want to cultivate psychological safety. And what does that mean? We're going to talk about that in more detail, but it really means making that space where people can feel brave enough to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, and to take risks and chances, and know that there won't be any sort of punitive response to that. We're going to talk about active and constructive responding, some strategies to build relationships, really, building blocks of that. And then boundaries, which are going to be really important as people try to figure out how vulnerable can they be in the workplace and how much can we share. So psychological safety is really a belief that your employees need to have, that they can be themselves, that they can ask questions, they can disagree, they can make mistakes, and it's okay to try to work out all of these problems in real time without being embarrassed or singled out. Some teams have a great amount of psychological safety already, and others don't. Some teams don't know, right? You might know whether your employees or your colleagues feel safe. But being able to acknowledge when we fail and how we grow from that is a really important way to start building psychological safety. There's lots of benefits, and people feel like they can be more creative, be more innovative, they can connect more with others, and it's really an opportunity to help people feel like they belong, not fit in, right? So fitting in means being like everyone else. Belonging means being yourself and being accepted for that. So how do we do that, right? What ways can we start to build psychological safety? And are there ways that you as leaders might not be doing that, or maybe even undermining it? Being able to talk about failure and resilience is a great way that leaders can start that, because we've all failed. We've all had experiences where things didn't go according to plan. And so by starting to tell those stories and to use your own experiences as a model and a guide, and then to be able to show your growth from that, is a great way to set that stage for safety for others to have those conversations as well. So we can start by being accessible and approachable, right? Making sure that folks know that they can talk to you. And just saying, I have an open door policy is not really enough, right? You need to be getting out there and having the conversations with people, not expecting them to come to you. Acknowledging people. So it sounds really simple and straightforward, but it's something that a lot of people don't do. If someone walks past your office, say like, hey, Mary, how are you? Nice to see you. When you come into work in the morning, greeting people by name as you walk through the office. Those things make a difference, and it helps people to understand that you know them and you care about them. being really clear about handling issues consistently amongst staff. And then something I really like is this idea of seeking out pros and cons for big ideas. So if you have something that you're working on as a team that, you're trying to decide what to do, being able to gather everyone together, and instead of just saying, what does everyone think about this? Because people who are trying to, stay on your good side might just say like, oh, that's fantastic. And people who are constantly trying to poke holes in things are just going to give you the negatives. But asking everybody, what are some pros and cons about this idea? I want everyone to give me some of each, right? Asking people to help balance the conversation. And that is, again, that example of holding both at the same time. So this is going to be a way for, number one, you to get feedback on whatever decision you're trying to make, but also to bring people in, to help them feel included, to help their voices be heard. And when people are giving both pros and cons for an idea, that way, no matter which outcome the situation goes with, you've incorporated feedback from everyone on the team. I really love being transparent if you don't know. If someone comes to you with a question about something that's going on at work and you're not sure what the answer is, say, I don't know. That's a great question, and I actually don't know the answer to that yet, or we haven't figured that out yet. We're working on it, and here's where we're at right now, and I will get back to you once I find out some more information, right? So just being really open to the fact that we don't all know it all the time. And then it's bolded because it's so important. When someone makes a mistake, we have to be able to frame it as a learning opportunity, right? And acknowledge times you've made mistakes as well. So when we do that, we make it safe to take chances. We make it safe to make some mistakes, and we use it as a way to figure out how to grow, how to improve, how to move forward. This is the number one most important thing that I believe as far as creating that sense of psychological safety. Providing updates, more information is always better. We have a lot of information in our heads, and the folks that we supervise or our colleagues don't always know what's happening within our own understanding. So being able to share more than you even think might be necessary, because it helps people to feel connected and included and grounded. And then another great strategy is rotating leadership of meetings, giving people the opportunity to take the helm sometimes. So I think if we're using some or most of these, that's a really good way to set the groundwork and that space to create psychological safety. And that's going to be necessary for people building trust and connection. This is a great skill that I love talking about, that I think we all do these things, but we don't necessarily know we're doing them. So active and constructive responding is a way of responding to good news that helps rebuild connections. So again, we've been isolated, we've been siloed, we haven't been able to really connect in the same ways that we used to. In the past, if you were coming in for a meeting and it hadn't started yet, you would chat with the person next to you, you'd hear something about their lives, you would start to build those little building blocks of connection. Now, when you're on a Zoom meeting, everyone's on mute with their camera off until the meeting starts. You talk about the business at hand, and then everybody logs off again, right? So connecting in different ways outside of the work tasks are really important. The 4 types of response styles, right, are a joy cultivator, a joy thief, faking it, or a hijacker. So I like the example of, if I came home from work and my sister was over and I said, I had such a great session at the HR collaborative today. I had 100 people in my session. They were, so excited. Oh, it was such a good day. And my sister could answer in a few different ways. So she could be a joy thief, just pointing out the negative or really minimizing. So she could say, wow, that was a lot of people at the same time in the same room. I really hope nobody had COVID. Was it really worth it to have that many people together at the same time? Like, could you not have just done that on Zoom? Right? I mean, she was active. She was engaging me, asking me questions. But she was very destructive and really bringing down my sense of joy. She could be faking it, kind of, oh, that's nice. And then go along with whatever she was doing. She didn't say anything negative, but she didn't do anything to start engaging or building up that sense of connection. She could be a hijacker, right? I come in like, I had such a great session. I had 100 people in the room with me today. And she could say, oh my gosh, I was so busy today. I had to cover for my boss. She was out sick. I didn't even get a lunch break. I'm so hungry. What are you going to make for dinner? Right? Like, turned it completely away from me and brought it onto herself. Or she could be a joy cultivator. showing authentic interest, building on that excitement and enthusiasm that I came in with and saying, oh, congratulations, tell me more. How did it go? What were the best parts of your day? How did you feel when it was over? Right? These are ways to cultivate connection, cultivate joy, and start to build that connection. These might seem like really simple tactics, but they absolutely work when you're starting to think about who are the people that you like engaging with, the people you feel supported by. And when you can do this with small pieces of news and interactions, it helps to grow into those bigger and more robust connections. So we've got about 15 minutes left. We're going to keep going. So these are some conversation starters that you can use with your teams, within your departments, within your colleagues. These are not word for word sentences you have to say. So I've definitely had people come to me and say, well, I would never say that sentence. That's an awkward way to ask something. These are ideas, and these are sort of a framework. So when you might be concerned about someone who maybe isn't showing up the way that you used to them showing up, you want to be able to ask more than just, how are you? Because when we say, how are you? People say, fine, I'm fine. And then you go, okay, and you move on. People are rarely fine. And if you're concerned enough about them to ask, they're probably not fine. So you can ask things like, it's been such a challenging couple of weeks or a year or whatever. Like, I've been struggling in the last couple of months. Like, how are you dealing with all of this? You know, how's it impacting you? You might say, hey, I've noticed you've been late like every day this week, and you're usually really punctual and on time. Like, what's going on? Do you want to talk about it? I'm here to listen. You know, I'm just, you know, I've noticed. You might want to say something like, you know, how are you feeling about this hybrid work routine that we're in now? Like, you know, I've been struggling with managing my commute. Like, how are you doing? Or you might just be like, hey, you're not yourself lately. What's going on? You know, how are you feeling? What are you doing to cope? So just asking some more connecting questions rather than just how are you, right? And these are just some examples, but ways to build into a real conversation that doesn't get shut down with the fine. How are we, right? We're trying to start building community again and rebuilding connections. So when you start a team meeting, for example, instead of just diving right into, okay, here's our tasks and how are we doing, pick one of these questions and do a quick round robin, right? What does a good day look like for you? What's something you wish that people would take more seriously about you? If we cancel the last meeting of the day, how are you going to spend that time? I really like this one. What is an assumption that most people make about you that's not true? We did this at a session a couple of weeks ago with one of my clients, and one of the participants said, everybody assumes that I'm grumpy and angry, and I'm not. I'm in a great mood, but people think that I'm grumpy, and something about the way that I look or the way that I talk gives people that impression. And people in the room kind of nodded and were like, oh, yeah, actually, sometimes I do think that. And it started to create that shift in how people see him. So these are just some quick intro type questions, but when you start to use them within a group, again, it's a strategy for rebuilding that sense of connection. This is a strategy that leaders can use with their teams, and it's from Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor. So some of you may have read this already and know about it, but I like to highlight it because it's a fantastic strategy. She talks about having 3 different meetings with the people that you supervise. And the first one is a get to know you. It's literally tell me about your life, right? And you let them tell you as much or as in detail or as deep as they're comfortable with. But ask them, you know, what motivates them? What do they value? Tell me, you know, from as young as you want to until now, what have you been doing? What kind of jobs have you had? What are your interests? It really helps you to get to know people outside of just their current role within your job, within your organization. Next meeting, you're talking about their dream job. At the height of their career, big picture, what would they love to be doing in life? It's probably not what they're doing right now. Maybe, but probably not. You know, most of us have a dream, a goal, an ultimate, you know, ideal role that they'd like to be in. So learn about it. You know, where do they want to get to? If you've got someone who's working with you in an accounting office, in an accounting department, and they want to be a 5-star chef in a Michelin starred restaurant, like, okay, well, there's a disconnect there. What do we need to do to help support people to get to where their goals are? What skills do they need? And then the third meeting is really making a plan. So over the next 18 months, how are you going to help them build the skills that they need to get to their next step, right? Who are the people that they need to know? What are the types of projects that they need to be working on? Do they need to develop their people management skills? Do they need to be able to develop their creative skills? So figuring out where people are now, where they want to be, and how you as their support person can help them to get there. And this is a great way for people to feel that you care about them, that you're invested in them, that you're connected. And when people feel that their supervisors and leaders are invested in them and care about them, they will move mountains for you, right? These are ways to help people feel supported, connected, and invested so that they're not experiencing burnout. They're not trying to leave the job sooner than the natural trajectory of their work. And then who are we? Really figuring out how do we use our values to connect as an organization? Why does it matter what we're doing? What actions do we take as a team? Do our organizational values line up with our individual values? So these are all strategies that we use when we work with organizations to have retreats and workshops to help organizations come up with their values structures and make sure that they're connected with the values of the individuals who work for them. So these are great types of questions to use in sort of a team retreat or a workshop day where you're trying to start to build up that sense of who are we. Okay, so for the last 10 minutes or so, we're going to focus on more of our internal strategies, the things that we can do ourselves to cope and build our own resilience. So one thing that we can do is complete the stress cycle. And this is from a great book by the Nagoski sisters called Burnout. And these seem really simple, but they're evidence-based and they're proven by all the neuro research to actually change the ways our brains function. So these strategies help to reduce your cortisol, reduce your adrenaline, and turn off the part of your brain that gives you that stress response, your sympathetic nervous system, and turn on your parasympathetic nervous system, which is called your rest and digest. So exercising 20 to 60 minutes a day. I know that not all of us love to exercise. Unfortunately, it is the number one best way to reduce that stress response in your body. But you don't have to be on your Peloton. You don't have to be running a marathon. Literally moving your body is what's important. So it could be having a dance party in your kitchen with your kids. It could be taking your dog for a gentle walk around the block. It doesn't have to be something super intense. It could be doing some yoga or some stretching, but moving your body is what's important. Breathing is so beneficial in terms of how it changes the ways that our neural pathways work. We're going to do a little breathing exercise at the very end, but there are lots of different mindfulness apps and things that you can look up online to help you with different breathing patterns. There's Calm and 10% Happier. And I think tomorrow in your mindfulness session, you'll learn a lot about that. Casual and friendly interaction is actually scientifically proven to make us feel less stressed. So being able to just have a chat with the person who's, making your coffee at the coffee shop in the morning, or, chatting with one of the moms on the playground. That casual, friendly interaction actually tells your brain that it's safe to relax, because if you were in danger, you wouldn't be able to be having those types of conversations. So there's something about that that helps click off the stress response and turn on the relaxing part. Laughing, crying, laughing till you cry. Those are all some of my favorite strategies. Affection, which has been really hard for a lot of people over the last couple of years. So any type of physical touch can be really good for bringing your stress response down. It could be hugs and kisses and snuggles with humans. It could also be snuggles with your fur babies. Animals are a great way to connect and get that sense of affection, especially if you're someone who maybe lives alone or has been feeling more isolated over the last couple of years. And then any type of creative expression. And again, that's because when we're in that flow creative state, our brains cannot also be in the stress response state at the same time. So by engaging in things that connect us, whether it's drawing, painting, playing music, listening to music, cooking, crafting, we've come up with all kinds of new hobbies over the last few years. Things that help us feel creative and in that state of flow help us to turn off our stress response. So these are all really good individual strategies. And this is like a menu, right? You don't need to be doing all of these. These are not going to be for everyone. Some people don't want to do anything creative, but really love to exercise. Some people feel like breathing and meditation really works for them, and casually chatting with a stranger feels absolutely horrible. So it's okay to pick and choose which of these feel the best for you. We don't have time to really cover positive psychology today, but I want to mention it as a topic. This is something we work a lot with organizations on, is incorporating positive psychology into the workplace. The basics of it are that we've got 5 measurable elements called PERMA, and when you're maximizing these parts of your life, you're going to feel better. So positive emotions, that engagement and flow state where you're really invested, building supportive relationships, feeling like we have meaning and purpose in our work, and then a sense of achievement and accomplishment. And I would love to talk to you all day about these. But these are just some little teasers and tidbits that you can look into further if you're interested. This is a really simple cognitive behavioral strategy that you can use anytime when you're feeling stressed in the moment. It's called the FACE model, FACE. So we're going to focus on what's within our control. So as an example, I was worried about missing a flight not that long ago. I didn't know if I was going to be able to get home to my kids, to get them to school the next day. There was tornadoes in the area, and I was nervous and worried, right? So what's within my control? I cannot control the weather. I cannot control whether my flight takes off. I can control whether I'm in comfy clothes at the airport, whether my laptop and my phone are charged so that I can do the things I need to do to communicate. I can make sure I have enough food and water to keep myself feeling okay. And I can make sure I have a plan of where I'll stay that night if I can't get out on that flight. Acknowledging your thoughts and feelings. So taking this non-judgmental stance around how we're feeling and paying attention. I feel anxious. I'm a little worried about whether or not I'm going to get back to my kids. It's okay. It's normal to be worried about that, right? We get stressed and anxious when things are outside of our control, and that's okay. Come back into your body. So I always kind of do this when I'm talking about anxiety because I hold anxiety and stress in my neck and shoulders. So where are you feeling it in your body? Breathing into it, rolling your shoulders back if that's where yours is, or, noticing if it's in your gut, taking some deep breaths, focusing on loosening up those parts of your body, maybe like unclench your jaw, take the tongue off the roof of your mouth, and just notice where you're feeling those feelings. And then E is engage in the task at hand. So be mindful of your present space, pay attention to the moment you're in, focus on what you're doing right now. So in that moment, I was about to give a presentation. So I needed to be focused on talking to my group, to being present in the space, and to present my content and not let my mind wander too much into what's going to happen tonight at the airport. And you can just do this over and over again in 30-second increments. Focus, acknowledge, come back, and engage. And it's not going to solve the problem or take away the stressor. It is going to help you cope better with the stress happening in your body and being able to move through it in a way that feels more comfortable and less frantic. Self-compassion is something I want to briefly touch on. We are really good at taking care of other people, and we are much less good at taking care of ourselves. So when we're thinking about self-compassion, a brief, quick strategy that I like to offer folks to use is when you're giving yourself that mental sort of beat down, when you're kind of giving yourself a hard time, stop. Imagine your best friend came to you with this exact situation, and even say out loud, write down, or in your head, what would you say to your best friend in that situation? And then I want you to reframe that conversation for yourself. And it might feel a little awkward to be doing it. I promise you that the more you do it, the more you start to automatically give yourself that more calm, compassionate self-talk instead of the beating yourself up version. Just knowing that, we're all still struggling right now. We're trying to figure all this out. We are doing the best we can. And by reframing those conversations with yourself in a much more compassionate way, you're going to be more likely to move forward in a way that's productive and helpful. And finally, we're going to do a very brief breathing exercise to finish up. So I'm just going to do a slow down exercise with you. And then we can, cover the other ones if we have a minute. But I want everybody to just take a minute, take a deep breath in and let it out. And we're going to do something called triangle breathing. So I want you to either on your palm or on a piece of paper, practice outlining a triangle. And so we're going to breathe in for 5 seconds, hold for 5 seconds, and exhale for 5 seconds. And I'm going to count that out for you. So another deep breath in and out to start. Now we're going to inhale slowly. Hold your breath. And exhale slowly. Now inhale slowly again. Hold your breath. And exhale slowly. And one more time, we'll inhale slowly. Hold your breath. And exhale slowly. You should feel a little bit calmer, a little bit more grounded, and a little bit more slowed down than you did 2 minutes ago. And even if we don't feel better, I promise you, probably none of you feel any worse, right? So just doing that little bit of slow breathing can help when you're feeling anxious, again, not to solve the problem at hand, but to put you in a position where your stress response has calmed down enough that you can see the bigger picture, that you can engage in a solution, that you can take care of yourself. And so hopefully that was a nice little taster. I'm sure tomorrow you're going to be doing much more of that. So I like to end by giving you a daily self-care checklist. This is from the beginning of the pandemic that someone named Brooke Anderson came up with, but it's my favorite list. And if you're doing most of these things every day, you will start to feel better. So what are we grateful for? Who are we checking in with or connecting with? What expectations of normal are we letting go of? That is my favorite. How am I getting outside? How am I moving my body? And how am I creating or cultivating some beauty? So if we can be doing these things, it's not going to solve the stressors, but it is going to help us be more able to cope. And so when we're thinking about healthy workplaces, sometimes it's creating space for vulnerability. Sometimes it's fixing this culture of stigma and silence. Sometimes we're trying to figure out how to deal with stress, anxiety, burnout. And sometimes we're trying to shift away from numbers and metrics into thinking about a more balanced and holistic view of what's a mentally healthy workplace. So these are all the different things that we like to work on with organizations. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I was delighted to talk with you all. And I think Sophie's going to come back on maybe and see if we have a couple of questions that she might want to follow up with.
Here we go. I'm back. Amy, thank you so much. That was excellent.
Thank you.
I don't know about anybody else, but I have got so many notes. And yeah, I just found that was absolutely packed. I could have listened to you talk all day. And I think I'm so glad that these sessions are recorded, because I do think that this is something that people are going to watch and think that they want to share it with a colleague, or, rewatch and take deeper notes themselves as well. I think, and your contact details are on the screen right now. And also for everybody, please do remember that we're going to send these out afterwards as well. So you will get an email with the recording and with all of Amy's details. And there were some great sort of slides there that I wrote down, even going back to the beginning, the wheel of power and privilege, which was just really interesting just to look at and think, this is just a model that anybody can kind of start to understand. Right from the very beginning. I love it when we do these sort of sessions and we end up with synergy that is completely unplanned, because if anybody was here on the Monday session, then you'll recognize some of the words that I used in my own session, talking about external versus internal. And I think, you've gone a lot deeper into that topic, which is really, really great. I guess the question that I would have, and I'm curious about this, and I'm curious, first of all, how many people who are watching feel that their company has psychological safety, and feel like some of the things that you were talking about are in place. I guess maybe from it's a culture thing, isn't it? It embeds in the culture.
Absolutely.
I thought that the strategies that you shared around building that were so good. But I am curious if you experience people who struggle with resistance from management, or that side of. I'll take the screen off, Amy, so that you can hopefully you can see me as well, because I know you had the screen in front. But is that something that you find is a challenge for people?
I do. I think a lot of the times when I'm working with organizations and we're starting to build psychological safety, leaders tend to believe that they're already creating a lot of psychological safety, or that it's not an issue or it's not a problem. And then when I'm surveying or assessing or talking with team members or employees, we're getting a different perspective, right? So employees might be saying, no, I don't really feel safe speaking up in front of my manager. And the manager is telling me, oh yeah, we all have really open relationships. And so I think there is a disconnect. And I don't think it's anyone's fault necessarily. I think that managers believe they're doing a good job because their employees or their staff don't necessarily feel like they can speak up. And so they're not speaking up. And so nobody really knows how the other person is doing. So I think a lot of times bringing us in as facilitators is the way that they start to figure out, oh, there is a disconnect because there's a middle person now that's hearing from both sides. So I think a lot of times it's a miscommunication and a disconnect. Less frequently, but still sometimes there's actual pushback from management saying, like, this is a job and people need to come here to do their work. And this is about mental health and psychological safety. And so that's a little bit more work on my end to try to start shifting mindsets for those leaders.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting that you say it's not necessarily pushback, it's more the lack of awareness around it. And I think there's probably people watching that are thinking, yeah, I really want to build this. I really want to put these strategies into place. But actually, not only do I have to kind of sell this into the team, I also have to sell it up to management in a way. So there might be a bit of education to do there. I love the piece about the responding and being the joy cultivator, because I think everybody will know that they've had sentences, even if they're outside of work, or they've had conversations where that conversation has been hijacked, or somebody has been, I think you called it the negative, I've not written it down.
So there's the joy thief, or there's the faking it sort of.
Yes, yeah. But I think, you know, as a really simple exercise, launching some initiative where you say, you know, let's have a week where everybody tries really hard to be a joy cultivator, and sharing that could be really interesting for companies if they're embracing some workplace wellbeing initiatives. Then that could be a great one.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so simple and it costs nothing. And it makes a really big impact on starting to rebuild those connections, right? And we all do all of them, right? Like, I can think times that I've been a joy thief, or I've been a hijacker, or, you know, my kids will come home from school with all their millions of worksheets. Mom, look at this. I got a star on my worksheet. I'm like, oh, nice. And it was an opportunity for me to do better, right? To say, like, show me what was it about. How does it feel? It takes 30 seconds to have that conversation, but the impact of it is huge.
Yes. I think launching something like that within a company could have, you know, starts to shift behavior, and then it starts to shift the culture. And I think that that's, you have shared so much. Like I said, I've got notes and notes all over my desk. And I'm sure that that everybody else is going to be feeling the exact same way. So thank you so much for giving up your time. I know it's kind of early morning where you are in Chicago, and it's been so great to have you on. So really appreciate that. So for everybody who is watching, if you haven't already, then obviously if you're not already registered, make sure that you register so that you receive that email afterwards. Even though we're late in the week, you can still register, and you will get the email with the recording of this session, and all of Amy's contact details as well, so you can go and check out her website. And then don't forget to come back tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow we're going to be going a little bit deeper into mindfulness, and this is a session that is open to all employees, so please bring your teams for a Friday lunchtime, you know, a bit of learning, and then something a bit fun and different with a bonus DJ set from Kareen. So thank you. Well, it's been such a good week. It's nearly over, but Amy, I really appreciate you joining. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for having me. It's been fantastic.